Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. My name's Simone Abram. I'm the director of the Durham Energy Institute, and delighted to welcome you to this DEI seminar. And our speaker today is Nikki Kluskens, who is doing a PhD at Eindhoven University of Technology, and she's with us here in Durham for a couple of months as a visiting PhD student, which is really nice. And her work is on the social aspects of the energy transition. And, you'll all know that we've talked a lot about the idea of community acceptance in relation to new technologies and decarbonisation, infrastructure, and so forth. And Nikki's work is really interrogating this and coming up with some interesting questions around what we mean by community acceptance, which is really helpful. So her work is really in the intersection of energy justice, public engagement, and acceptance. And she's studying social aspects of the transition over time. So she has a background in European law and sustainability science and policy. And her PhD is part of a project called FlexiNet, which is on energy flexibility and hybrid heat and energy storage facilities. So lots of synergies with some of the work we're doing here in Durham. So I'm delighted to welcome her today. So Nikki's going to talk for about half an hour or so, and then we'll invite questions. So feel free to pop questions in the chat or just indicate that you want to ask later on, and we'll turn it into more of a discussion later on. But until then, Nikki, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simone, for that kind of introduction. My name is Nikki, as was already said, and today I will be talking about the community acceptance in the context of the energy transition. And already some disclaimer here, my work focuses mostly in the context of the Netherlands, as this is where most of my research took place so far. And really interrupt me at any point if things are unclear or if you have questions. I am really open to have a bit of more of a hybrid kind of presentation. So feel free to just interrupt. I don't know if I can see, but just unmute and just interrupt me if you want to. As Simone said already, I focus on the social aspects of very broadly sustainability transitions, but mostly the energy transition, or energy transitions, as they can be very diverse, of course. To give a bit of background, I focus on community acceptance, energy citizenship, and justice in the context of energy transitions, because what often is mentioned, at least in the energy transitions literature, is that they are kind of related, these concepts. And whether there's a causal or correlation between causal relationship or correlation between the concepts is still a bit unclear. Hence, I also wanted to see can we see if we can make that more tangible, to see what the connection between these three concepts really is. And first part of the research I do on community acceptance, and I tried by splitting it up in three different sorts of research. I try to unpack this connection or these connections between these three concepts a bit more. But today I will focus mostly on community acceptance. And I know it's quite a highly discussed topic in the context of the energy transition debate already. So please, if you have any comments or ideas, or I would be happy to know. Also from from different kind of disciplines. But I'm sure I don't have to to really put it into context in this crowd, but just for the sake of the storyline, as we know, climate change calls for urgent energy system change towards renewables. At least that's the focus in most European countries so far, that we transfer from renewable energy system to fossil-based energy system towards a renewable-based energy system. And now I specifically speak for the Netherlands, but we see a lot of policies on the energy transition focusing more and more on community acceptance, or it's getting more and more policy attention, also the concept itself. And on the one hand, you can say oh, that's quite nice that we actually see that within the energy transition debate, it's not only focused on the technology alone, it's also acknowledged to some extent that there are social issues related to that. But the downside, or like the other side of the spectrum, so to speak, is that the social aspect of the energy transition is now very much like often coming down to the idea of, okay, we just need social acceptance, and then the social problem of the energy transition is also kind of solved. So that has a big focus in at least policy arenas in the Netherlands as well. We just need acceptance of renewable energy technology, especially on the implementation level. And the question is always a bit like, why? And then for that reason, I just very quickly take us a bit back to the theory behind it. And that's that actually social acceptance is being conceptualized in the literature as being, it exists out of three kind of elements, namely social political acceptance, market acceptance, and community acceptance. And together they make social acceptance as a concept. And with social political acceptance, they often mean general acceptance. So for example, to make it a bit more concrete, wind energy as a source to the grid. Market acceptance is then more like the uptake of a technology and its diffusion by the market or market players. And community acceptance is then mostly the real implementation of a renewable energy technology. So on the local level. And we often see that the social political acceptance is not like, for example, in the case of, I try to focus a lot on the context of wind energy, but we see a lot of examples in the context of wind energy is that on the level of social political acceptance, it's not really a problem. For example, wind energy as a source to the grid, it's quite, on the level of acceptance, we quite agree in the European context, at least, that it's a good source to the grid in the transition towards renewables. Also, we see that in the context of market acceptance, we see that the technology is being diffused by market players is actually can be quite a good business model as well. But we see, and that's like why the theory behind it, the theory behind it says like, okay, actually, when things have to be implemented, that's when we actually run into problems. And that's also like, that raises a lot of questions for me too. Is that really the case? And of course, we all know these kind of examples of when there was no acceptance, or like cases of opposition. And also, like in the literature, it's stated like we see that if there is no opposition or like no acceptance, so if there is opposition, projects can delay or can be actually cancelled, which also has risks in terms of environmental costs, because we actually don't have the time too much to not implement renewable energy technologies in light of the urgency of climate change. So that's often an argument being used why also the focus is on community acceptance so much, also with the idea to overcome. So that's a bit of the background of how social acceptance is being conceptualized in literature. Also assuming that this is then also like community acceptance to the local level of implementation is then also where then, according to literature, the assumption lies of where acceptance is most hard to actually realize, or like where also the problem lies the most. And then I was intrigued by that, and I dived into the literature, and I saw actually, yes, we have done a lot of research on acceptance in the context of the energy transition already. We have identified a lot of factors that actually influence influence social acceptance in the broader context. And we also categorize them a bit again, like you can also categorize them again a bit in the background of social political acceptance, market acceptance, and community acceptance. And I'm sure that these kind of factors are not new to you at all. Like, for example, participation, trustworthy information, but also access to benefits are all kind of factors that are being associated with influencing community acceptance. So like on the local level. This is actually, so we made this categorization because some factors seem to be more relevant, for example, for more general acceptance than for community acceptance. However, when we looked into the literature, we saw that we know a lot of factors, and the actual thing that we don't know is that it's all quite static, right? Like if we have these factors, like we still don't really know like how then acceptance or community acceptance emerges over time. So it's not really the case that if we have all these factors and we cross-check them and we have checked all the boxes, that we then have acceptance. So that left us with a big question, like how does it then actually come about? Like how does it emerges over time? Another thing was, and it was more on the empirical level, we saw that a lot of research also that research these factors focuses a lot on hypothetical cases. So for example, on the social political acceptance, what would you think if a certain wind or solar project would actually be implemented in your backyard, for example? So really not on the implementation level at all, so quite general. The actual research that there was on implementation level often focuses a lot on opposition and trying to explain factors that actually influenced opposition towards certain renewable energy projects. So concrete, and now I generalize a bit, concrete acceptance cases. So on the local implementation level, so the positive examples are hardly unit of analysis. So that also raised questions for us, like, okay, is there actually then differences between how we look at social or like community acceptance as a process instead of as an outcome, especially in the cases that can be considered successful also administratively. So so without without any contest. And with that idea, we developed kind of a framework to understand how community acceptance comes about. And I will go through them one by one, but we looked at who is actually accepting, how are they doing that, what are they actually accepting, and then over time. So we look at actors and roles, responses, objects of acceptance over time. And I will go through them one by one to clarify that a bit. So in order to understand how community acceptance comes about, it's like we saw that it is important to look at who are actually accepting, or who are these actors and what is their role in this renewable energy implementation process. And to clarify that a bit more, like I showed you this triangle already that divides social acceptance into 3 elements. But in the literature, it's actually being said that these kind of elements of social acceptance are also being expressed by different types of stakeholders. So is public or like social political acceptance mainly being expressed by, so to speak, the public, key stakeholders, policymakers, market acceptance by consumers, investors, and firms, and community acceptance, as is conceptualized in literature, as local authorities, residents, and local stakeholders. The idea is not that these kind of actors live in a vacuum. No, they're actually embedded into social in social interaction. And these actors also have like different roles in different phases of renewable energy implementation processes. So with this into mind, we thought, okay, it's quite important to see actors and their role in the renewable energy implementation process. What is nice about this is actually also the acknowledgement that not only residents are part of community acceptance, but actually also local authorities and local stakeholders, which also nuances this idea of residents being important for community acceptance alone. So the second dimension we looked at is the responses. So how are actually people or actors responding to renewable energy technology implementation on a local level? Because like in other words, how are they accepting? And now there is not really like one definition of acceptance in the literature. It's quite used interchangeably, like with, for example, support, tolerance, a lot of other different concepts that are related to it. However, we use the definition of Birch and al, like that actually say, okay, acceptance is quite a range of possible responses or approval responses. And why we chose this definition to work with, because it also allows for silence to be included as a response as well. Because like a lot of research so far has been focusing on either outspoken support or outspoken opposition, which leaves like the silent middle group often out of the picture, which actually can give us very interesting or valuable information about behavior or like opinions or views of non-outspoken actors in these kind of processes. The third dimension was then what are these actors actually accepting? So we call them the objects of acceptance. Why is it important? Like we looked at these objects of acceptance because as Wolsing also expresses in the case of wind energy, is that what is being accepted in the more social political dimension is different than, or can be different than what is being accepted at the community acceptance dimension. So for example, wind energy as a source to the grid is a different object of acceptance than concrete implementation of a wind turbine in your backyard, for example. This object of acceptance can differ across scales, so to speak. It also is related to the distribution of decision-making across scales. So for example, from the international to the local level, often also results in like more concrete decisions on the local level being made. So we saw also that actually the object of acceptance and the importance to include that as a dimension is because you also see that objects differ or can differ across decision-making scales as well. The last element was over time, because like we noticed in the literature, acceptance is not a one-time thing. Like it can be quite a dynamic and change over time. So we looked at the who, the how, and the what over time, and we did that by looking at the who, how, what in 4 phases of local implementation process, and then in the context of the Netherlands. To make it a bit more concrete, in the Netherlands, the renewable energy technology the development looks or can be categorized into 4 phases, and that is actually because a lot of like this renewable energy development process can be characterized actually by both formal and informal institutionalized processes. So for example, the formal ones are the ones that are legally part of the implementation process. And these actually can trigger a lot of informal institutionalized processes as well. For example, preliminary consultation between developer and municipality, for example. Based on these 2 processes, we can actually divide the RED development process into 4 phases: preliminary phase, then the permit phase of when, for example, a wind or solar park has been permitted or gets a permit to actually start operation, the construction phase of those projects, and the execution phase. So that is actually, we look at the who, how, what over time within these 4 phases. So with this lens, or like this idea on how to understand the process of acceptance, we looked particularly at cases that can be categorized as uncontested. And as I said before, we mainly looked at cases that didn't face any opposition or like delay due to opposition. So like what can be considered successful administratively, at least. So we looked at cases where there was no opposition or like no delay due to opposition, and we did that by only including cases in our analysis that actually that did not face any court proceedings, because that is mostly where delay due to opposition is most well reflected, where actually projects get delayed or even cancelled sometimes. So as I said, with this in the back of our heads, we selected 8 cases in the Netherlands, both wind and solar projects, in very different regions of the Netherlands as well. And we actually did do, so we included 8 cases, so to speak, and we spoke with 33 people in total, to understand like how this process of acceptance came about over time. We paid extra attention to the inclusion of of people that actually so we included it with the form of snowballing, but we paid extra attention to what is often heard in the literature as a critique that, as I said already, acceptance is either being conceptualized as or operationalized as either outspoken opposition or outspoken support. We included that by random selection of people into the process as well. And how did we do that? Just by literally ringing doorbells. I was with my bike and I just cycled through to these sites and just ringing doorbells of people that actually were not brought forward through the snowballing method. Actually, really nice because people loved to talk and actually were very happy to just speak about their experiences so far in these processes. So that was really, really nice. Do I have to say more about? No, I don't think so. Just to quickly also run through the results. I will also go like that, as I said, with the framework, I will go through them a bit one by one. So when we had done all the data collection, we saw that when we looked at the objects, that people actually express different express acceptance responses towards different aspects of the implementation process at the local level. To make that a bit more concrete, both in the wind and solar projects, we could identify 7 objects of acceptance. So what people actually respond to. That is location, the technology, the spatial integration, the process, the construction, the distribution of benefits, and the direct and indirect effects. So these are all parts or aspects of the renewable energy technology implementation process that people actually have a response to according to themselves. Interestingly, all like as I showed you on the little map already before, is that we included both wind and solar projects in our analysis, and also the characteristics between these projects like differed a lot. So as I said, like some were wind and solar, some were actually being placed in very rural areas, some more in industrial areas, some had, for example, if we look at the location somewhere, then for example, placed more in industrial areas, rural areas. But when we, for example, looked at the process, some actually had more like a participatory process, some that actually have none of those aspects or like characteristics. So I see already. Oh, do you want me to already reply to the comment in the chat or not? Because I can stop at any time.
Just whatever timing you prefer.
The communities ever wonder at the decommissioning phase of these projects? What do you mean with the decommissioning phase?
This might be one to come back to maybe at the end, because it's
right.
going to.
I will put it at the end. Yes.
Yes.
So some had, as I said, some had process of participation, some had not at all. What this also shows us is that actually, what this shows us is that actually, because we both included wind and solar projects, we could also see that this whole idea of acceptance is going beyond technology acceptance alone, and it's actually could be very much related to different aspects of such a process. So as I said, or as I showed you before, is that what was already being identified in literature is that the objects of acceptance, as we call them, can actually differ across scales, right? So as I showed you before, but what we also found then is that actually also objects of acceptance can differ, or like there's different objects of acceptance within one scale of decision making. I showed you them already before. It's 7 in total. But interestingly is that the direct and indirect effects were also parts or aspects that people respond to in that consideration, of course, in the renewable energy technology project. And for example, like a great example, I think, is that people really think about, or like people thought about, yeah, but and we know this already also as well from the literature, like this consideration of like, do we need more energy, and do we have to place this idea of more energy into, for example, nature areas. So you can also see that what is happening on the local level is actually being part, or like is embedded into broader societal concerns. For example, the energy sufficiency debate, that people actually thought like, okay, but do we need to go on this trajectory of replacing the demand of energy literally with the same amount of renewables, or is energy sufficiency also like a part that we have to discuss here? So you can see that so what's being decided when things are being concrete on the local level, that is actually being embedded into broader societal concerns as well. One interesting one was also that one of the actors told me, I really want to put solar panels on my roof, but so now this project is being so now we have this solar park here being put in my backyard, which actually means that I cannot really put my own solar panels on my roof again, because we have grid congestion in the Netherlands. We cannot deliver the energy back to the grid in case there is too much. So that also has implications then for individual homeowners that actually want to invest in solar panels on their own roof. That actually is not possible then anymore if these bigger projects get like prioritized, for example. Of course, and this is, I think, not really a big eye-opener, but the response, like if we look at the responses, we see that these were actually diverse between and within actor groups. And what do I mean with that? So we looked at authorities, residents, and other stakeholders on the local level. And actually we saw that responses just differed between these stakeholder categories, but also within. So for example, we could identify with authorities that their response to, for example, the idea of a renewable energy project was either hesitant or they were quite supportive of it. For residents, we could actually see the difference between three kind of responses: mostly dislike, not minding, or being fine with it. So being fine was also the most supportive response in that regard. So that also shows that it's not like we cannot really put either authorities or residents in the pro or con kind of category. It was actually quite heterogeneous within and between actor groups. So interestingly, these responses that we saw like in this process of the renewable energy implementation relate rather to specific objects than the whole renewable energy implementation in general. And what do I mean with that? So for example, I showed you these already before, but for example, people's responses relate either to elements of this process. So for example, location, technology. So for example, not liking the location, but being fine with the process. So yeah, then it's rather a dislike or like of certain aspects than the whole RED implementation as a whole. What we saw is actually that these responses do not change that much over time. We saw more that these objects of acceptance do, and that's of course also part of the renewable energy implementation process. That's like certain objects of what people accept emerge in different over time in different phases of a project. But that does not necessarily, like we saw, for example, that these objects emerged in different moments of time, towards then also different responses could relate. So we saw, for example, that for example, if the location is being mentioned in the first place, that people have a response to that, and then later on the spatial integration, but then they have like another response to the spatial integration, but it does not necessarily mean that the responsor's location has actually changed that much. So we could what we could see is then actually is that this process of responses is actually more part of a weighing process where certain aspects are being weighed against the other aspect or like prioritized. And we could actually see that, so for example, liking the location or the technology, not liking how the distribution of benefits is being organized. And then like depending on what they prioritize or these actors prioritize the most, you can see it's like a sort of weighing process of, rather than actually like a full acceptance of every aspect of a full dislike of every aspect. This weighing process, we could observe that it was the same for authorities and residents. However, for residents, we could also see that this weighing process is actually being influenced by their idea or like how they want or think they can actually influence the process. So there you could also see that that for residents, actually this weighing process is a bit more influenced by also the idea of role of the role they can take. Interestingly, here we could also see that acceptance, or like it nuances this idea of acceptance being really a checklist of everything as a checkbox where everything is being checked before acceptance actually, or like certain responses happen. It's more a weighing process in that regard. That's and for example, you can see that here, like it's a quote of one of the actors. Of course, you can object, but it's like with an election, if 100 people do object and 200 do not, then it stops. Anyway, you can nag about that, but that's democracy, isn't it? So then you can also really see that this weighing process is being influenced by how people think they can actually influence the process or not. Then also the actors and roles. So we saw that, and that's of course like an add-on to what was already said in literature, like community acceptance is going beyond citizen acceptance alone. So what we saw, for example, is how important the role of the local authorities is in these kind of cases. So also you see like differences with, for example, hesitant authorities and supportive authorities in how the rest of the process is being or can be developed. This also nuances this idea of or like this idea on the focus of citizen acceptance as such a bit, because we saw that actually both local authorities and other stakeholders and residents together need to be on board together to make it kind of work. I will just focus a little bit on the roles of residents, because I think for local authorities it's more like being managed by, of course, formal and therefore later on informal procedures. But for the roles of residents, like we could see, of course, that the roles between those stakeholders differ. But for residents, we could actually see 3 types of roles, or how they influenced the process of renewable energy technology implementation. First, we could see inaction, so not taking a role, or like not having a role at all. And that's either because of lack of reservations, so being okay with the process, or like with the renewable energy technology implementation, or because of feeling of disempowerment, and that's also not new, right? We saw, on the other hand, as I showed, like we also included cases where there were actually participatory processes, and then they were just offered a more active role, but these roles were then also limited to only certain aspects of RED implementation. So, for example, that they could think along with the spatial integration, for example. Interestingly, we could also see that in some cases where there was actually not necessarily participatory process being set up, we could also see that people actually established a more active role themselves. Also, again, here only towards certain aspects. And what the most prevalent one was the distribution of benefits, that people actually stood up to also influence the process with regard of the aspect of distribution of benefits. So that also gives a bit of, like, it was really an interesting act sometimes between the feeling of disempowerment and the self-established active roles that certain residents took. what we could see is that a more active role also increased the acceptance of that specific object of acceptance. So for example, if they were being offered a role in the spatial integration, we could also see that indeed regarding that aspect, the response improved a bit. Also, despite remaining disapproval of other objects. So it is not necessarily like that it's then covered or like, raised all the dislike towards other aspects necessarily. What we also saw is then, for example, so that's actually also like a bit of trying to untangle a bit so the interaction between participation and social or like community acceptance is that roles can indeed influence, but are not the sole determining factors of certain responses towards these kind of projects. What we saw then, like of course, and that's also already being expressed by the literature, is that the desire for roles, so participation or being engagement, is also quite diverse. When we, for example, look at residents and that desire for being included in the process is different towards formats and objects. So actually, we saw that people wanted to have more of a broader choice in what objects they actually want to influence, and also like in what kind of formats. So, for example, some people really wanted to be included in the distribution of benefits and not necessarily in other parts of the process. And some people, for example, like this diversity also was visible towards the different formats that people want to be included in. So, for example, some people wanted to have like an active say in certain things or certain aspects. Some were really being okay with just being informed. So it was quite diverse and nuanced in that regard as well. Also shows again how delicate these processes can be, and also the urgency of just really listening to the people that you are working with. So as I said, this idea of that there can be a checklist for acceptance was nuanced by this research. It comes really about through a dynamic interaction of different actors, responses, and also, again, towards these different aspects of implementation. Interestingly, these opinions did not change that much over time, except, of course, for the certain, so it's more like a weighing process, where like certain things are prioritized, not necessarily meaning that there is a dislike, that there's change in dislike towards another aspect. But acceptance of some aspects or like objects of acceptance can influence then if that's being prioritized by certain actors, and it can then influence overall acceptance of the whole project, depending on what they prioritize, of course, and how important that is to them. So what we saw is that acceptance can still, like, we saw the difference, right, between like acceptance as a process and acceptance as an outcome, because we only looked at these uncontested cases, and still there we see that acceptance is quite ambiguous. Because it depends a bit on what you call acceptance. Then is the like a certain response towards one aspect, is that acceptance or not? That's still like point of discussion. And as I said, the role of participation is also nuanced in that regard, towards format and different aspects. So that was very shortly like a brief introduction to the research that I was doing with Floor and Johanna. And thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Nikki. That was so interesting. You're really a very interesting approach, and I really like the way that you focused on cases that appear to be very well accepted and just pull out some of the nuances. So thank you very much indeed. That's really interesting. Would you like to stop sharing? And I'll just invite everybody, if they want to switch on their cameras, that would be really nice. And we've got some questions already building up in the chat. And also, if anyone else wants to ask a question, you can either pop it in the chat or you can just stick your hand up and engage directly. Is that okay, Nikki? You're looking for the stop share button.
Yeah, I don't know why it doesn't stop, because it like.
Not to worry. One thing that viewers can do is just move the barrier on your Zoom screen so that the shared screen goes smaller and you can see the other participants.
So
So,
you're speaking now or not? Do you still see?
yeah, okay. Still, don't worry. Maybe Katie can get rid of it for us.
Oh, now it should be this.
Nikki, we've got a few questions here. The Will's question that came up earlier on, which was about whether in your discussions with people they talked about decommissioning at all.
Yeah, I like that's really my I don't know what you mean with decommissioning. That's maybe like a different word or how we used to
Go ahead, Will.
Yeah. So decommissioning of projects is just the end phase when it's got to the end of its useful life.
So that's okay, that's what I call indeed the execution phase in this word, but I can okay, now I understand. Yeah, it depends. Like what was really interesting, and I didn't got the time to dive into that further. But for example, some projects that did not have any participatory processes, for example, would not do that again because they think that with all the knowledge now that would actually be looked at very differently. So in that regard, they never dare to ask this question to the communities they actually develop these projects with because they were not aware at the time that this was that this could be like something maybe problematic. Yeah, so of course, like in some like it's as I said, we looked at different communities, also some in more rural, some in more industrial areas. So also factors of maybe spatial fit can also can play a role here. So that's actually not something that we really looked into. Just like how do you think of it now? And then some people were just being okay, or some still didn't like certain aspects of it. So it really relates back again to the aspects. Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. I hope that.
Alvi has a question. No, that's good. Thank you. Alvi has a question about the difference between community acceptance, community involvement, and community participation. Would you like to say anything about that?
Very good one. I think I have sometimes very much difficulties with these kind of concepts in the literature because they I don't know. What I can say is that of course I made some decisions in this paper just for practicalities. But I think the idea of participation is how do you it's less static than just these kind of categories of participation. And like what we see a lot in this policy domain as well is that it's being approached a lot like with the letter of Arnstein, for example, like certain levels of participation. So for example, information, consultation, and that's how participation is then being approached. Also, I think involvement and participation, I don't really I think let's put it like that. I find participation quite a difficult word to really conceptualize in these, because I think it's broader than just only community involvement, or like the way it's approached, at least in these kind of projects. But very good question, and I don't have a really good answer to that, I think. Yeah.
Maybe this question is also going to be a bit challenging though. Claire, why don't you ask your question directly?
Hi, Nikki. Great presentation. Well done. So my question kind of follows a similar vein. So thinking about how different these projects are governed, and how different communities get involved. So from the perspective of those projects that did engage with communities, did you look at the kind of type of participation? And when I say type of participation, I'm thinking, right, okay, did they co-design the project with communities? Was there any evidence of co-production, or was it just consultation? And did it kind of have a bearing on the objects of acceptance, really?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one, and I think yes, what we could see is that there was, like, for example, consultation or like co-development. I wouldn't call it like that, because it was already decided. It was already, like, location was already decided. Just the spatial integration could be like could be thought along too. What we like, and that's what I said in the presentation, we saw that regarding that specific object of acceptance, then that's increased a bit, also because or like the response increased a bit, because they what some people told me is, like, at least I saw how the process went in that regard, like, and I saw how the decision of the spatial integration or like the considerations there were being made. Even though, like, that's, for example, she still, that person particularly, she still didn't necessarily like every outcome of the spatial integration, but at least she had a certain
I mean, it could be good to explore that further, wouldn't it? And to look at how, relationships between different actors. So if it's a resident or someone from the local authority, the degree to kind of their social tie, and how that might influence acceptance as well, because it may or may not have a bearing on that.
Yeah, and that's what I found really interesting, is that it was so diverse. Also, these wishes for being involved in certain, and also with regard to certain formats, that there is like, for me, that actually showed once, like even more, that how important it is to ask people the way, like, they want to be included or involved in a certain way, or instead of just I don't know, assuming either, like, that they want to fully like co-design, or like only be informed. So it's much more nuanced. Yeah, and also with regard to these different aspects, it's not like that we then, like, can think of, like, oh, if we have asked everyone about what aspects they, like, would like to or don't like in that regard. No, it's more like, and to approach that as a checklist. No, it's actually, like, because I really do not believe that that's possible. Like, if you look at these results, I think it shows, like, how much people work it is to actually get all the nuances in these kind of processes. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. But I'm interested, like, what would your take then be on the differences then between involvement and participation in that regard?
Tell you what, I'll drop you a line and we'll pick this up separately, because I don't want to hog the discussion with everybody.
Yeah, and that's a really good response, because actually the point of having this seminar now is that, people have got opportunities to talk to Nikki while she's in Durham. Or obviously you can talk to her when she goes back to the Netherlands, but she is in Durham for a couple of months, so do take the opportunity to have a chat with her. And there's a question here from Siti about measurement tools. Siti, do you want to say anything about that? Or Nikki, can you see the question in there? Would you like me to read it out?
Yeah, I just, when you're talking about RET implementation, right, among the other actor groups, I'm just thinking that, do you have any measurement tool that you use to make sure that they have a balance between RET implementations among the actor groups that you can?
I'm not sure if I fully understand what you mean, but do you mean, like, if I use different methods depending on actor groups?
Yeah, methods. Yeah, some kind of methods.
But different one between the actor groups to get the information, you mean, or to measure, or because
I don't really understand the question, Siti. What kind of measurement are you thinking about, Siti?
Some kind like that acceptance of that kind of RET implementations among the groups. I mean, how?
Oh, yeah. Okay, I think I understand. Yeah. Yeah. No, we literally, like, asked them to describe it themselves, like, mostly on what they what their responses were like. So we approached it, like, more in the response kind of frame, and then also try to explain, or let them explain themselves, like, how they would describe that response. the thing is that like we did not really ask like different type of questions among different actor groups, because they were all like either directly seeing the project or like have been involved from a policy perspective. So they like everybody knew the project that we were talking about. So it was not in that aspect not that different languages were used or so, because like literally the projects were really visible for everyone in that regard, so that people could directly relate their responses to what was happening there, literally in their location. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
And there's a great question here from Fiona Dyer. I don't know if you want to say anything, Fiona, but she says, can you turn your research into a practical toolkit for community groups to help them engage the public in accepting the challenges of transitioning to renewable energy?
Yeah, the only thing is that, and that's more in the terms of empowerment, I think it's really often seen as or like there is this narrative of that people have to be put in a certain position to be empowered. But it's I like the thing I saw is that, for example, that people taking up an active role in the distribution of benefits is that's something that could be actually maybe being transferred to other communities, to just be aware of the fact that that's not really something that is really out of reach, or and that like it's not really a toolkit or tools. It's just more like this awareness of that that empowerment is also really something that comes from the bottom up kind of, and to show that example instead of like, oh, we give you now the space to empower. It was a bit. I think it could be a very great example of how people can show among communities like how they empowered themselves. Yeah, that's really not a good word, but like how they took a certain role outside of these pre-existing regulations or rules already. And I think that was quite cool to see. Yeah.
I guess there's a bigger question, Nikki, around I mean, it's partly situating your work in the wider field of infrastructure development, which is to say that one of the challenges, I suppose, is always that this acceptance is in responsive mode. So it's always being proposed and people being asked to accept it.
Yeah, totally.
Have you seen any examples of where a different approach might have been taken, or have you thought about alternative approaches to thinking about big infrastructural changes?
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of great examples there where that it's like not really a project or like a technology that is being imposed or something, but it's like a broader question of how would you as a community like to see this place or like this location being developed. I think there are really cool examples of that, but that's not really what we looked into with this one, because we wanted to also see the difference between acceptance as a process in these kind of accepted projects, which is of course like ambiguous again, but like I think there are cool methods and or like projects going on where this is less imposed and less co-developed. But yeah, that's not really what I looked into now. So I was
I wonder if there was anything, when you were selecting your cases of uncontested proposals, was there anything particular that, outside of the details of the proposal itself and so forth, but was there anything that they had in common, like any other factors, whether they're demographic or political or anything like that? Were there any external conditions that might have made it easier to put, or made acceptance more passive in these contexts?
I think what was striking is that most of these locations were already being pinpointed down for development as well, like and then other kinds of development, for example, housing, or in some parts even worse, according to the interviewees, even worse kind of projects. So that was kind of a development plan already for most of these locations, and that's what they had in common. But then again, like some were better, some were worse. but there was some idea or like some awareness that that location was going to be developed, whatever you call developing, but yeah, like that a project would take place there. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. Thank you. And
Yeah.
are there any other questions from anybody in just in the last few minutes? Has anyone got a burning question or just something that they've been thinking about? I can see that Khalil has just muted.
Hi, Nikki. Hi, Simon. Thanks. I just wanted to check, were these projects all that you looked at, were they all external developers, or were some of them community-based projects?
Yeah, some of them were community-based projects, or like that's what they call it, like yeah. And that's what I try to include a bit, like some were like indeed private developers, and some were more community developed. Yeah, so that's it was a bit of a yeah, there was diversity in that as well. Yeah.
Just a more general question: does the Netherlands have like a developed district heating? Is that fairly developed in the Netherlands?
Well, that's interesting. I'm looking into that now, and I see a lot of yeah, there is more and more coming, and also like in like policy or legal terms, there is being yeah, there is developments in that area. But I've done interviews like now for my second research on energy citizenship, mainly on district heating, and
Okay.
yeah, there is a lot to be done still, but things are yeah, developing in that regard. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the interesting talk.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
That sounds like another meeting that we need to arrange while Nikki's here to talk about
Yeah.
different kind of acceptance approaches.
Yeah.
I think that's probably time is pretty much up, and that's been incredibly interesting, Nikki. Thank you so much for presenting, and I think it will prompt quite a few really good conversations while you're in Durham. So thank you everyone for participating. Thanks for the great questions.
Yeah, thank you.
And
so much.
Nikki, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at the next DEI seminar.
Yeah, thank you so much. Also for the good questions, triggers a lot of new ideas. But yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye bye.
Thanks everybody. Bye bye.